Hello, welcome back. You do not want to see how long it took me to set this up, but I'm currently filming this on Wednesday, but it's not going out until Monday. So I'm trying to stick to a true crime. I did want to do a cult. This might be a long video, so this is why we're like this, nice and cozy. But I did want to do a cult, and I do plan on researching this cult and doing a whole video about it, but I decided not to do it for this week because I feel like I would just not have enough time, because this cult, there's so much on it that I feel like, and that also I feel like is going to be a really long episode, that because I am going away for a couple of days at the weekend. I'm going Saturday and come back Tuesday. I feel like I just would not have enough time to research, edit, and get it out for Monday. So we're doing this case instead, and because I had researched this case and I had all of my documents already done, so the hard part of researching was already done. I just have to film it. I feel like this is a really long intro, but today we're talking about an unsolved murder about Elizabeth Short, or as the internet knows her, the Black Dahlia. So I feel like anyone that's into true crime will know this, because this happened in literally nearly 100 years ago, if not 100 years ago, I believe. But Elizabeth was born on July 29th in 1924, who, like I said, she is known as the Black Dahlia. I feel like the whole media, everybody refers her as the Black Dahlia, but I'm personally just going to call her Elizabeth. So she was born in Boston. She was the third of 5 daughters. So second youngest, I'm so bad at. I'm so bad at thinking. Her father was a United States Sailor Navy, I believe, or yeah, from Gloucester Courthouse in Virginia, and her mother was a native of Millbridge in Maine. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the pair decided to marry in Portland, Maine in 1918. They briefly lived in Portland in 1927, the family, before settling in Medford, Massachusetts, I believe the same year, which is a suburb of Boston, I believe. Her father, Cleo, he had built a miniature sort of golf course until he had lost most of his savings in the 1920 market crash. In 1930, his car was found abandoned on the Charlestown Bridge, and he was kind of assumed that he had taken his own life by jumping into the river. So her mother took up a job as a bookkeeper to support the family, because they believed that their father slash husband had passed. And this, Elizabeth was going through a lot of sort of health issues. Like when she was 15, she was suffering bronchitis, which led her to, I believe, have lung surgery. She also suffered quite badly with asthma, and doctors recommended that she move to a more cooler climate. So in the winters, her mother sent Elizabeth to Florida to family and friends, which I couldn't imagine just sending my child to a whole different state, because I believe in America, there's some states that takes days to drive, that you're nearly just better to fly within the country. So I couldn't just imagine sending my child to a different state in the winter months. But then, like, maybe, I don't know, it was a different time then. So Elizabeth spent the next 3 years in Miami, Florida, and then she dropped out of Medford High School in her sophomore year, which I don't understand American schools, so I have no idea what age that is. But in the late 1942, Elizabeth's mother received a letter from her dead husband apologizing, and they found out and realized that he was in fact alive and had started alive, yeah, and had started a new life in California. So in December of that year, at age 18, Elizabeth had moved out to California to live with her father, who I believe she had not seen since she was 6, so it's been 12 years. At the time, her father was working at a nearby Mare Island Naval Shipyard at the San Francisco Bay, and arguments happened quite a lot between Elizabeth and her father, which led her to move out of January of 1943. So she only lived with her father for a month. She took a short job at the base exchange at Camp Crook, near Lompoc, California. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Briefly living with a United States Army Air Force sergeant who reportedly was very abusive towards her. She left there in the mid 1943 and moved to Santa Barbara, where she was arrested on September 23rd for drinking at a local bar while underage. Because I always forget, like, parts of me's like, oh, but she was 18. But parts of me forgets that America's legal age is 21. So I feel like America's the only age where, like, the legal age is quite high, because everywhere else I feel like is 18. The juvenile attorneys sent her back to Massachusetts, but she returned to Florida instead, making only occasional visits to her family near Boston. While in Florida, she met Mayor Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., a decorated Army Air Force officer of the 2nd Air Commando Group. I have no idea what that is. Who was trained for deployment to Southeast Asian theatre of World War II. Oh yeah, because World War II would have been kind of happening at this point. She had later apparently told her friends that he had put into writing proposed marriage while he was recovering from injuries from a plane crash in India. She accepted his offer, but he did die in a second crash on August 10th, 1945, and her sister also served in the war and was assigned to decorate Japanese massages. I mean, I feel like it. I mean, like, okay, maybe back then, especially if you're in working with the war, but I'm kind of like, okay, like, you're a bit unlucky to be in one plane crash, never mind 2 plane crashes, but obviously this was a completely different time, and especially, you know, if you were an active, like, sergeant working in the war, then I suppose. So in July of 1946, Elizabeth moved back to Los Angeles to visit the Army Air Force Lieutenant Joseph Gordon, who was an acquaintances from Florida. So I'm presuming that all that time she spent in Florida, they met. Who was sanctioned in, like, I guess, Air Base in Long Beach. She spent at least 6 months of her life in Southern California, mostly in the Los Angeles area shortly before her death. She had been working as a waitress. She was renting a room behind the Floating Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard, which I feel like Hollywood Boulevard I'd love to visit, but maybe it's an overrated attraction. Just how I would like to walk down Beverly Hills, because Beverly Hills, like, she kind of wanted to be an actress. Like, people described her as an aspiring or would-be actress. According to some sources, she did in fact have inspiration to be a film star, though she had no known acting jobs or sort of credits. And yeah, I would have, because when you see her, like, she does kind of give me like that image of like an actress in that era of Hollywood. I feel like, so that's kind of like a little bit of background, before we get into the murder of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia. So on January 9th of 1947, Elizabeth returned home to her Los Angeles home after a short trip to San Diego with 25-year-old Robert Manley, who was a married man that she was dating. He had stated that he had dropped her off at the Baltimore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and apparently Elizabeth had met one of her sisters who was visiting from Boston for the afternoon. By some accounts, staff of the Baltimore Hotel recalled having seen her using like the lobby telephone shortly after she was alleged seen by patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street, approximately 3/8 of a mile away from the Biltmore. Sorry, I was pronouncing it the Baltimore Hotel. It's the Biltmore Hotel. Maybe I am a little bit. So it's fine. So on the morning of January 15, 1947, Elizabeth's body was found naked, severed into two pieces, and it was found in a vacant lot on the west side of the South Northern Avenue, midway between Coliseum Street and West 39th Street, in the neighborhood of Lemert Park, which was largely undeveloped at the time. Now, when I first came across this case, I did look up. Don't look it up. I mean, I feel like now I probably wouldn't be too phased, because I've seen there's so much on the internet. I feel like now that you're like, what? But back then I had too much free access and free will to the internet. But yeah, I just don't recommend looking it up. But her body was severely mutated, and was completely severed at the waist and drained of blood, leaving her skin obviously very pale, which I'm like, how? Like, did they, whoever did this, did they, like, when they obviously did all that, did they just, like, how did they get the blood out? That's what I want to know. How did they do it? Because also, like, they would have had to have been neat about it, because I don't actually know if there was, like, because if they were messy, surely around where her body was found, there would have been blood splatters around her body. But then again, they could have cleaned up. But like, still, like, I just want to know, how did they manage that? Medical examiners obviously said that she was dead for at least 10 hours prior to the discovery. So she was found on January 15th, the morning. So did she die on January 14th, like before midnight? Or did she die in the early hours of January 15th? Because obviously, like that, they had said that she had been dead for at least 10 hours, but they do kind of speculate that potentially um that the time of that window was kind of during the evening of January 14th to the early hours of January 15th. Um the her body had apparently been washed by whoever killed her. So like they were very, neat and clean. Like they wanted absolutely no messes with this, which I find that even more sort of disturbing than like a messy killer, because they're trying to outdo, like outsmart like authorities, which I feel like that's even more scarier than a dumb stupid killer, in my opinion. And what's even more like disturbing is that like her face had been slashed from, like, like it's kind of like the smiley. Has anyone ever seen that horror film, like the smiley where like it's like, you know what I mean? um I feel like this that's just extremely disturbing and terrifying. Like, and uh, like cases like this, I'm always kind of like, was it personal? Because of just how graphic and how detailed the injuries were on her body. But this led to like this, cutting of her face being called the Glasgow Smile, which I actually don't know what that looks like. I have my 13 here. I'm gonna actually look up the Glasgow Smile. Um, okay, I don't really see. It's just normal smiles. Okay. I was kind of expecting something extremely disturbing, but I just got regular smiles and a picture of the Joker, which isn't disturbing. But she had suffered cuts in her thighs and her breast, while entire portions of flesh had been sliced away. Which, like I said, like I feel like this had to have been personal because of all the injuries that she had suffered. And the lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper portion of her body, and her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks. Which, like I said, this had to have been somewhat personal. And the corpse had been posed with her hands over her head, her elbows bent at right angles, and her legs were spread apart, which I quite frankly don't even want to imagine what even happened next. But the Los Angeles Herald Express reporter Angie Underwood was among the first, to arrive at the crime scene and took several photos of Elizabeth's body and its surroundings, which is now online. But I feel like any sort of big case, if you look at obviously JonBenet Ramsey, you can easily look up photos of that, which I think that disturbs me even more because that is a child. It's also the same if you look up, the Menendez case. You can see the crime scene photos. Gypsy Rose, like her mother. Surely that can't be right because of how like I obviously understand the crime scene photos have to be like put in the like in police databases, but surely not on the internet, and how easily it is to find all these crime scene photos. Near the bodies, near her body, detectives located a heel print on the ground, aimed fire trucks, and a current sack containing watery blood was also found nearby, which I'm like, was that her blood? Um, I don't know if that was tested. Was it hers? But an autopsy of her body was performed on January 16th, 1947, at the Los Angeles County Coroner, and the report stated that she was five and a half feet, like 5 foot 5 inches, tall, and weighed 115 pounds, and had light blue eyes, brown hair, and badly decayed teeth, because at the time they actually were not able to identify her like straight away. There were lignature marks on her ankles, wrists, and necks, and irregular decorations with superficial tissue loss on her right breast, which I'm not a medical expert, so I have no idea what that means. But it was also noted that there were significant lacerations on the right forearm, left upper arm, and the lower side of her chest. Now, her body had been cut completely in half, which how the lower half of her body had been transectioned. The lumbar spine between the second and the third lumbar vertebrae, which that's that has that that's what I keep going back saying, it has to be personal. Like, it has to be personal. But there's so much more of her autopsy report online if you want to look it up. If you are interested, do it. It's not really that kind of disturbing, but she was identified by her fingerprints, which were sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI, and her fingerprints were on file from her 1943 arrest. Remember when she was arrested for underage drinking? Immediately following the identification, a team of reports from the William Randolph Hearst Los Angeles Examiner contacted her mother, Phoebe, in Boston over the phone. They spoke with her mother, and I couldn't even imagine what that news would be like, to find out that your daughter, like halfway across the country, was just brutally murdered. Because obviously back then it wasn't like as obviously back then you wouldn't be like texting your parents, because obviously texting exists, but like you wouldn't be in contact with your parents or anybody every second of the day. But they did deceive Phoebe, Elizabeth's mother, and told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest. That her daughter had won a beauty contest, which is like, that's messed up. But it was only after praying as much personal information as they could from Phoebe that the reporters revealed that her daughter had been in fact murdered, which is like, can you imagine trying to this poor mother, and you're trying to get personal information out of her instead of just being a good Samaritan and being like, look, unfortunately there's been a terrible incident and your daughter has passed. But the examiner had also offered to pay for, Phoebe's flight to come out to LA, the accommodation if she would travel to LA to help the police investigation. That was yet another ploy, since the newspaper kept her away from the police and other reporters to protect its scoop. So we changed angles, but an Examiner article, I fucking scratched a freshly new tattoo, and I was like, they're shitting myself there for a minute. But an Examiner article pretty much, and this is kind of how she got the name, the Black Dahlia, describes the black tailor like suit that she was last seen in, which the media picked that up and pretty much started calling her the Black Dahlia. And the Los Angeles Times on January 17th deemed the murder as a sex sort of slaying, which I kind of maybe get. But on January 21st, a person claiming to be Elizabeth's killer placed a phone call to the office of James Richardson, the editor of the Examiner, congratulating Richardson on the newspaper coverage of the case and stating he had planned on eventually turning himself in, but not before allowing police to pursue him further. Which I'm like, I mean, this case is obviously unsolved, so I don't think he did it, because we all know that people will just claim to kill, especially if a case is getting big media coverage. People from all sorts will claim that they killed somebody, just for attention. But additionally, the caller told the Examiner editor to expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. And that was a direct quote from this mysterious caller. 3 days later, a suspicious envelope was discovered addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, with individual words that had been cut out and plastered from newspaper clippings. Additionally, a large message on the face of the envelope read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Let her to follow." The envelope contained Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and additional address books with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. The packet had been carefully cleaned with gasoline similar to Elizabeth's body, which led to police the suspect that the packet had been sent directly by her killer. Which, honestly, okay, I know I said maybe, but like at the same time, how did this person be able to get her birth certificate, like, and personal belongings? That's kind of weird. So despite efforts to clean the packet, there was fingerprints found and they were sent to the FBI for testing, but unfortunately they were kind of damaged in transit, so they could never properly be analysed. The same day as the packet was received by the Examiner, a handbag and a black suede shoe was reported to have been seen on the top of a garbage can in an alley, like a short sort of distance from where Elizabeth was found. The items were recovered by police, but had also been wiped clean with gasoline, destroying any fingerprints. So on March 14th, an apparent suicide note scrabbled in pencil on a bit of paper was found tucked in a shoe in a pile of men's clothing by the ocean edge of the foot of the Breeze Avenue in Venice. The note read, I'm gonna read this directly: "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." Which is like, what? The pile of clothing was first seen by the beach caretaker, who reported the discovery to the lifeguard captain, and they immediately turned it into the Los Angeles Police Department. The clothes included a coat, trousers of blue herringbone tweed, a brown and white t-shirt, white jockey shorts, tan socks, leisure shoes that were about a size 8, and the clothes gave no clue to the identity of their owner, which was great. But this case well, I feel like this case will never be solved. But they quickly found the address book owner in the packet that was sent, a suspect who was called Mark Hansen, and he was apparently a wealthy local nightclub and theatre owner. He was also apparently acquaintances with Elizabeth, and he, according to some sources, did confirm that that was Elizabeth's shoe that was found, on top of the garbage bin, and also the purse that was found. Anne Todt, Elizabeth's friend and roommate, told investigators that she had recently kind of dismayed some sexual sort of advances from Hansen, and suggested it was a potential motive to kill her, which I feel like that does make sense. But apparently he was cleared of all sort of suspicions. And in addition to Hansen, the Los Angeles Police Department interviewed over 150 men in the upcoming weeks who they believe would be potential sort of suspects. Robert Manley, remember the guy that she was dating, who was also married, was the last person they believed to see her alive. Was also investigated, but was cleared of suspicion after his passing. And I feel like it would have made sense for him to potentially be the killer because he was like that married. But a total of 750 investigations from the Los Angeles Police Department and other departments worked on Elizabeth's case, and its initial stages, including 400 sheriffs and 250 California State Patrol officers, and they searched through everything. They tried to find evidence. They searched through the Los Angeles River to see could they find anything, and there was no any sort of more evidence. Lloyd G. Davis posted a $10,000 reward, which would be the equivalent in 2024, so last year, to $140,820, for any information leading to Elizabeth's killer. After the announcement of the award, various persons came forward with confessions, which police dismissed as false. Several of the false confessors were charged with obstruction of justice. And I feel like once you bring money up in a situation, I feel like everybody's gonna potentially try and come forward with some new information, in the hopes of getting the money. So on January 26th, the Examiner received another handwritten letter which read, here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger. I have no idea. I mean, I don't think this person turned themselves in, but the letter also named the location of which the supposed killer would turn himself in. Police waited at the location the morning of January 29th, but the alleged killer did not appear. Instead, at 1 p.m., the Examiner officers received another cut and paste letter which read, have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified. I don't know what this person means by a square deal. You weren't from my knowledge, this person wasn't given a deal. But the graphic nature of the murder and the subsequent letters received by the Examiner had resulted in a media circus surrounding Elizabeth's murder, and both local and national publications heavily covered the story, many of which reprinted reports suggesting that Elizabeth had been tortured for hours prior to her death. The information, however, was false, yet police allowed the reports to circulate, and people believed that was her true cause of death. Um, Further reports about her personal life were publicised, including details about her alleged declining of Hanson's sexual advances. Additionally, a stripper who was an acquaintance of Elizabeth um, told police that she liked to get guys worked up over her, but she left them hanging dry. This led to, some reporters and detectives to look into the possibility that she was a lesbian, which I don't know why your sexuality in this sort of ideal matters. Um, like, I, I don't. Um, and they began, questioning employees and patrons of gay bars in Los Angeles. The claim, however, remained kind of unsustainable. That Herald Express also received several letters from the purported killer, again made with cutout and pasting clippings, which read, "I gave up on Dahlia's killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." Which is like, dude, like, I feel like this is, oh, what's that case? Is it the Zodiac killer? Yeah, it's Zodiac that has all these weird letters that they send, and like cryptic letters. It's like, dude, like, what do you mean? So on February 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News did report that they did run into kind of a stone wall with new leads for investigation, because investigation was pretty, slow. There wasn't really any sort of new leads. When interviewed, the lead investigator, Captain Jack, I'm not going to try to pronounce his surname, told the press that he believed that Elizabeth's murder had taken place in a remote building or shack on the outskirts of Los Angeles, and that her body was transported to a location where it was disposed of. Based on the proceeds caught on her body, the LAPD locked into the possibility that the murderer had been a surgeon, doctor, or someone who had medical knowledge. In mid-February of 1947, the LAPD served a warrant to the University of Southern California Medical School, which was located near the site where the body had been discovered, requesting a complete list of the program students. The university agreed, as long as the student's identity remained private. Background checks were conducted, and there was no sort of, I guess, anything for them to be like, okay, we need to go and investigate this person. By the spring of 1947, my voice is slowly going. I started recording when it was kind of a little bit brighter than this. But Elizabeth's murder had become a cold case, and with a few new leads, Sergeant Finis Brown, one of the lead detectives on the case, blamed the press for compromising the investigation through journalists propping details of unverified sources, in which that makes sense, and they unverified any of their reporting. In September of 1949, a grand jury converted to discuss inaccuracies in the LAPD's homicide unit based on their failure to solve numerous murders, especially those of women and children. In the previous several years, Elizabeth being one of them, in the aftermath of the grand jury, further investigation was done on Elizabeth's past, which detectives traced in her movements between Massachusetts, California, and Florida, and had also interviewed people who knew Elizabeth in Texas and New Orleans. However, the interviews yielded no useful information in the murder. Now, the majority of, or the normality of her murder has spurred a large number of confessions over the years, many of which had been deemed false, Because like I said, a lot of people, especially when a case is getting a lot of media attention, will come out and say, I did it for attention. During the initial investigation, police received a total of 60 confessions, most made by men. Since that time, over 500 people had confessed to the crime. Which, like, that's what I don't understand. Like, if you, like, why would you confess if you didn't do it? Like, that surely has to be some mental issues. Some of them who had not even been born yet at the time of her death. Sergeant John at the LAPD detective who worked at the case until his retirement stated, "It is amazing how many people offer up a relative as a killer." In 2003, a guy named Ralph, one of the original detectives on the case, told the Times that he had believed he had interviewed Elizabeth's killer, a man who had been seen with his Sweden parked near the crime scene in the early hours of January 15th, 1947. A neighbour driving by the day stopped to dispose a bag of lawn clippings in a lot when he saw a parked Sweden, allegedly with his right rear door opened. The driver of the Sweden, I hope I'm pronouncing this vehicle correctly, was standing in the lot. His arrival apparently startled the owner of the Sweden, who approached his car and peered in the window before returning to the Sweden and driving away. That's a bit suspicious. The owner of the Sweden was followed to a local restaurant where he worked, but was ultimately cleared of suspicion. Although never charged with the crime, George Hodel came to wider attention after his death when he was accused by his son, LAPD homicide detective Steve Holden, of killing Elizabeth and committing several additional murders. Prior to the Dahlia case, George Holden was suspected but not charged in the death of his secretary and was accused of raping his own daughter. This man. But he was adequate. He apparently fled the country several times, and he lived in the Philippines between 1950 and 1990. Additionally, Steve, his son, has cited his father's training as a surgeon as circumstantial evidence. In 2003, it was revealed in notes from the 1949 grand jury. I have all my notes to my side so I don't mess up because I have it all in bullet points. That the investigators had wiretapped George home and obtained recorded conversations of him and an unidentified visitor saying the supposing, "I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary, which is dude. What? Actually, what?" So in 1991, Janice, I'm not going to try to pronounce her surname, who was aged 10 at the time of Short's murder, Elizabeth, claimed that she witnessed her father, George, beat Elizabeth to death with a claw hammer in the detached garage of her family home in Westminster. She also published a book titled "Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer" in 1995, which she made additional claims that her father sexually abused her. The book was commended as trash by her stepsister, who stated she believed it, but it was in reality. "I know because I lived with her father for 16 years. Additionally, St. John told the Times that her claims were not consistent with the facts of the case. The 2017 book, Black Dahlia, Red Rose, focuses on Leslie Dilton, a bellhop who was a former mortician's assistant, his associate, Mark Hazen, and Jeff Connors, and Surgeon Finis Brown, a lead detective who had links to Hazen and was allegedly corrupt, which I feel like all police officers in America are probably corrupt. Um, they persist that in the book that Elizabeth was murdered because she knew too much about the men's involvement in a scheme for robbing hotels. She further suggests that she was killed at the Astor Motel in Los Angeles, where the owners reported finding one of their rooms covered in blood and in fetal matter. On the morning of her body being found, the examiner, the motel found us the morning that her body was found. The examiner stated in 1949 that the LAPD chief William A. Wharton denied that Astor Motel had anything to do with the case, although its rival newspaper, the Los Angeles Herald, claimed that the murder took place there, which is kind of interesting. I mean, they're kind of arguing with one another. So in 2000, Buzz Williams, a retired detective with the Long Beach Police Department, wrote an article for LBPD's newsletter, The Rap Sheet on Elizabeth's Murder. His father, Richard F. Williams, was a member of the LAPD's Gangster Squad investigating the case. His father reportedly believed that Dylan was the killer, and that when Dylan returned home to his home state of Oklahoma, he was able to avoid going back to California for investigation or anything like that because of his ex-wife was second cousins with like the governor there, who contacted the governor of Oklahoma on Dylan's behalf. His article claimed that Dylan sued the LAPD for $3 million, but the suit was dropped, which that's kind of, interesting. But Hastings disputes this, stating that Dylan was cleared by police after an exhaustive investigation, and that the district attorney's files possibly placed him in San Francisco when Elizabeth was killed. Harsh's claims that there was no LAPD cover-up and that Dylan did in fact receive a financial settlement from the city of Los Angeles, but was not produce concrete evidence to, I guess, prove that he got a settlement. That was a lot. I feel like I need a sip of Coke Zero. Wow. I feel like this video is so long. What time is it? 10 past 9, I feel like. And I started this at 8:15. It's fine. I feel like this case, because it's... When did this happen? I'm actually going to Google it. So how long since the murder of the Black Dahlia? So she has been murdered from today, as of filming, the 28th of August, 78 years, 7 months, and 5 days. Will it ever be solved? I don't know. Let me know what you think. And my next video will hopefully be about a cult, and I will see you then.